Yes, sir, you're audible.
Of writing. He writes poetry and short story fiction who needs no introduction to the word of literature. On behalf of college management, I express my deep gratitude to her for taking time out her busy schedule to talk with our students and share of loving writing with them. Writing Your Distance is an e-initiative of the Department of English University College, which intends to open the door of creativity for our students by introducing them to fertile minds across the globe. In three earlier events of the series, the department welcomed Kavish Khair, Sauna Singh Bedwin, and Geeta Hariharan. Today, interaction with Kavita Ezekiel Mendonca is the fourth in the series of we all are eagerly looking forward to a wonderful lecture. Her sharing of knowledge and wisdom with our student is highly fortunate on our part and shall help to inspire them a lot in their journey as a scholar and writer. I also take this opportunity to congratulate the Department of English, particularly Dr. S.M. Yahya Ibrahim, Head of the Department of English, Karim City College, Dr. Neha Tiwari, Dr. Basudhara Rai, Professor A.K. Das, and Professor Saket Kumar for organizing this program and for bringing the word of such an admirable academic. I extend my best wishes to the faculty of members and students for dynamic learning session ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So we once again, take the privilege of welcoming Kavita ma'am. And before we hand over the session to her, I would like to say something about her to introduce her. So Kavita Ezekiel Mendonca was born in Mumbai to Professor Nazim Ezekiel and Daisy Ezekiel. She was raised in a Beni Israel Jewish family in Bombay, India, and attended Queen Mary School, St. Xavier's College, Bombay University, and later Oxford Brookes University, UK. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree in English, American literature, and education. Her career has spanned over 4 decades in Indian colleges, American international schools, and Canada, teaching English, French, and Spanish. She also held the position of career counselor at the International School in India, where she taught advanced placement and other courses in English for 16 years. She's a published poet, and her first book, Family Sunday and Other Poems, was published in 1989 with the second edition in 1990. She has read her poems all over India and all over many countries across the world. Her poems have appeared in reputed magazines. She also has a poetry page to herself. She also writes short fiction. And as far as I have, since I have been following her work for the past several months now, I realize that there are strong resonances between her father's poetry and her. In fact, there are many poems where she takes off right from where the late poet Nazim Ezekiel left it. And I think we have a wonderful, wonderful oeuvre mushrooming in Kavita ma'am's poems. And we look forward today to hearing her talk on simplicity and authenticity in poetry. Thank you, everybody. Over to you, Kavita.
Thank you very much, Dr. Basudhara Rai, for inviting me to give a talk to the students of the Karim City College in Jamshedpur. I've never met her except right now virtually. And yet I feel I know her because of the warm messages we have shared. It is impossible to refuse an invitation that is extended so graciously. Thank you to the English department at the Karim City College in Jamshedpur. I'm sorry, there's some distortion. Somebody is speaking on the, maybe you can mute that and then I can continue. Is that okay?
It would be good if all the participants, could mute themselves. Otherwise, we would have to do it from this end.
Yeah.
Yes,
thank
please
you.
continue.
I'm delighted to be able to speak to students. Interacting with students and learning from them has always given me the greatest joy in my teaching career spanning over 4 decades. Along with poets, I think they're a very special community of individuals. There's a joke in my family that I was born in a classroom. I've wanted to teach since I was in kindergarten. My mother, who woke up at 4:30 in the morning to cook the food and pack our lunches for school, needed 40 minutes of quiet time to rest briefly before the next part of her day started. So I would slip out into the garden attached to our rented home in Bombay to teach the leaves. I would take a ruler with me and beat the leaves that I thought were not paying attention to me or they were misbehaving. I quickly learned from my grandmother that beating a child was not the way to get it to learn anything. You had to give him or her a good explanation why they should behave properly and pay attention to you as a teacher. I do come from a family of teachers. My parents were both teachers, as were my grandparents. Actually, my grandmother founded and ran her own school for disadvantaged children in a very poor neighborhood in Bombay. That's where I got my first lessons in teaching. So there were definitely many very strong influences that led me to follow a career in teaching. When I was pursuing my degrees in English, French, and American literature, I really wasn't certain in which direction I should move after that. Some people just know what they want to do, but not me. I loved singing, and like all young people, I wanted to be a rock star. It was my father who would keep repeating that teaching is the noblest of all professions. Singing should be reserved as a hobby, according to him. And so it was to be. When I first started teaching, I loved it right away. I taught in different art colleges in Bombay and even teaching English in a reputed hotel management institute. My favorite courses to teach were courses in poetry and creative writing. So I would like to dedicate my talk to all the students I've taught over the past 4 decades and all the students here tonight or this morning in India who are listening to my talk. Just a little background before I get into the subject of the talk. I've been writing poetry since the age of 9. One of my first poems, which I wish I had kept, was called The Crucifixion. I got 10 out of 10 from the English teacher. 10 out of 10 was very important, right? The poem was written for a class assignment, but was based on a real life experience. Since I was the only Jewish student in the class, I got teased for killing Christ. I kept repeating that I didn't do it since I wasn't there. But anyway, children have their own perceptions. I also earned the nickname of Shylock, though I was nothing like him, when we were studying Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. I'm sure you all know Shylock, right? But on a serious note, children and young people do write some of the best poetry. I'm not an expert on poetry. Bob Dylan said, "A poet is anyone who wouldn't call himself a poet." I've studied and taught it for several years, so I think I can share some valuable experiences with all of you. In addition, of course, I was blessed to have a poet for a father. I think some of you may have read or studied his poems in school textbooks or college textbooks. His name, as you know, is Ezekiel, and he named me Kavita, which comes from the Sanskrit and means poetry. So I was steeped in poetry as a little girl. Perhaps my name might have been prophetic, and combined with my maiden name, Ezekiel, whom I think you know was a prophet in the Bible, there must have been some kind of double prophecy at work. That's just my interpretation, by the way. I not only love writing poetry, but I've written several poems about poets and poetry, and I thought I would read one of mine on the subject of poetry just to start with. And it's called Poets Are. Poets are wonderful miners of gold, writers of myriads of stories untold, finding pearls in oysters deep, writers of nature, flowers and sheep. Lovers of all things ridiculous and sublime, creators of themes diabolical and divine, keepers of conscience, guilt and the truth, spinners of old age, childhood and youth, bearing the soul in rhythm, meter and rhyme, purveyors of beauty, the dirt and the grime. Poets make music with the harp and the lyre. Poets play with irony, imagery and satire. Plumbing the depths of the soul of a man, all things considered, they're a very special clan. Now I'm a step closer to my theme, authenticity and simplicity in writing poetry. But before we begin to define the words authenticity and simplicity, let us talk exactly about what a poem is, since poets write poetry and a poem is a unit of poetry, and what it means to write a poem and poetry simply and authentically. Of course, you cannot separate a poem from poetry. The two are parts of the same whole. If you type a request for a definition of a poem to Wikipedia, it will revert you to poetry. There are so many definitions of this form of writing. The two I love best is where Mary Oliver, a poet I love and admire, compared the writing of poetry to filling a basket. Here's what she said. Poetry isn't a profession. It's a way of life. It's an empty basket you put your life in and you make something of it. And then there are some lines from my father. He said, a poem is an episode completed in an hour or two, but poetry is something more. It is the why, the how, the what, the flow from which a poem comes. And to quote Emily Dickinson, whom I also love, said, if I read a book out loud and it makes my whole body so cold no fire could ever warm me, I know it's poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know it's poetry. These are the only ways I know it. Is there any other way? And a few more quotations I included. From Salvatore Quasimodo, he said, poetry is the revelation of a feeling that the poet believes to be interior and personal, which the reader recognizes as his own. And the famous one from Wordsworth, you probably all know it by heart. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion. Shake your heads if you know that one. Yes? Yeah, there you go. And Marion Moore said, poetry is the art of creating imaginary gardens with real toads. You know, when I was young, we had this garden, like I was saying before, and we used to stand there with the pouring rain. You know how it rains in India? Not like it rains here. And we used to listen to the sound of the frogs croaking. Those were real toads. But she says poetry is the art of creating imaginary gardens with real toads. Anyway, I want to use an Indian analogy to talk about authenticity. If we could replace the basket, which Mary Oliver was talking about, with a dekchi or a bartan, a vessel in which we make dal or lentils, as it is called here in the West, and each one of us fills it with real stuff, the result would be authentic. I can see some people smiling when I say dal, right? I know that as Indians, we can't do without dal. I can't do without it here either. It's a staple of our diet. Now, you're going to ask me, what does dal have to do with writing a poem? Don't worry, the answer will be revealed in due course. But keep the image of dal in mind as I will be returning to it in my talk. Authenticity. First, I'd like to define the word authenticity. According to the dictionary, authenticity is defined as genuineness, originality, validity, and the quality of being real. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines authenticity as true to one's own personality, spirit, or character, sincere and authentic with no pretensions. I particularly love the last part of the definition, with no pretensions. Shakespeare said something very important about this aspect of human nature. To quote Shakespeare, this above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any other man. That comes from Act 1, Scene 3 of the play Hamlet. When you write poetry, poetry is a reflection of your personality. Then what you express in the poems you write will not and should not be false or pretentious. Readers of your poems can tell almost immediately whether you are being sincere or pretentious. Writing in your own voice, which for some poets takes a long time to develop, also contributes in greatest measure to the expression of authenticity in the writing of poetry. It takes time and patience to develop your own voice. It's easy to be influenced by the writing of other poets in terms of sounding like them, especially with the explosion of poetry on Facebook and Twitter and other online platforms, which we are all so exposed to. All of us who read the poems of other people experience self-doubt, especially if your poem gets rejected and their poem gets published. You feel tempted to try and write like them, but that simply will not work. It will sound artificial because it's not you. Now here's where the dal comes in. I know you were waiting for it. When you make dal, although we all follow the same steps, yet each person's dal looks and tastes different. Most Indians even use roughly the same ingredients in making dal, yet each person's dal reflects their style, their taste, their hand, and I put hand in inverted commas, their kala, or their special art, if you will. We use our hands to make dal, and we use our hands, minds, and hearts to write poetry. I always say my mother made the best dal, and all of you probably say that your mothers make the best dal. When my husband, who's the main chef in our house, makes dal, I say to him, "You have perfected the art of making dal. Yours is authentic dal." Just as no two dals are the same, no two poems are the same, no two poets are the same, though they may have similar styles and themes. Sometimes, even if I try to make dal the way my mother made it, does not turn out like hers. And then there's the tarka, or the seasoning. Everybody knows tarka, right? You all give tarka to your dal. These are the special ingredients you will add to transform your poem. Things like imaginative use of metaphor and simile and other literary devices. Everyone gives a different kind of seasoning to the dal and to their poems and to their poetry. So be authentic. Be who you are, your skills, your talents. Write like the unique person you are and be proud of the gifts you have been given. Every life has a unique story of its own. You have to tell about your life and its rich experiences. Express your lived life freely and confidently. Don't worry about what others are saying or doing or writing. I know this is easy to say, but hard to do. Don't write to impress or imitate another writer. Don't try to please the world. I write anecdotal poetry, and all my poems tell life stories using colloquial language, the language as we speak it. It's my style. It's how I write. There's not a lot of anecdotal poetry out there, I observe. You should be able to tell from reading my poems that these are my authentic experiences. I hope so. There's no attempt to mask my feelings and experiences in clever language or complex images that tire out the reader and diminish his or her pleasure. If I did that, you would read a line or two and then you would abandon my poem. Poetry is to be enjoyed. It's not a mathematical problem to be solved, which is one of the reasons I was never good at math. Math requires an exact answer. My mother was a math teacher, and each time she tried to help me solve those math reading problems, I would ask why. A teacher in my school told me, if you want to ask why about everything, then you take literature. And I did. Literature reflects life. It's a mirror of life. The only question I want the answer to is, why does my dal not turn out as good as my mother's or my husband's? The answer lies in me. It is my hand, if you will. I shouldn't try so hard to make my dal like someone else's. I should just do it my way. But it's nice that my family loves the dal I make because it tastes different. I can't believe it. Your poetry too should have its own unique taste. Develop your own unique flavor, if you will. Oscar Wilde said, and this is my favorite quotation of all times, this is what he said, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." And what does it really mean to be yourself? It means making the challenging effort to knowing your true self, being comfortable with who you are, with what you discover, with the way you are, with your own set of values, morals, and ethics. You can learn to be more and more authentic, though that teaching first comes with our parents and our teachers, even our friends and our role models. It's easy to be fake, but that can be easily found out, even in writing. Now I come to simplicity. I'll start with some dictionary definitions from the internet. Simplicity is the quality or condition of being easy to understand or do. The dictionary mentions similar words such as clarity, clearness, plainness, comprehensibility, and lucidity, directness, and the one I love best, user-friendliness. That's kind of like a term we use in technology, and I'm not very good at technology, but user-friendliness, the word I like. And the opposites of simplicity are complexity and intricacy. And then simplicity, according to the dictionary, is also the quality or condition of being plain or natural. Similar words are unpretentious, lack or absence of adornment or embellishment, and plainness. And a third definition I will mention is that simplicity is a thing that is plain, easy to understand, with words similar such as sparseness, restraint, severity, classic lines, clean lines. I like that. Classic lines, clean lines. And I love absence of clutter. I'm always struggling with absence of trying to reduce the clutter in the house. I'm sure some of you do the same, especially during the pandemic times. We have little more time to do the deep cleaning. And here in Canada, we don't have any house help at all. So we have to constantly try to clean the clutter. But we have to clean the clutter of the words in our poetry as well. At this time, I wanted to share a poem about what I wrote, what I consider to be authentic and simple in poetry. And authenticity and simplicity have a connection. The title of the poem is simply Poetry. And I'm just going to read it. Give me simple, show me what you saw. Give me pure, the ocean hugging the shore. Show me the river flowing brisk and clear. Show me the tree I can climb without fear. Make me listen to the ripples, the sound of the stone. Make me listen to the wind as it makes moan. Show me the silt, brown as my skin. Show me the dirt, the chaos, the din. Give me authentic, your own true voice, loud or soft, without any choice. Give me direct, help my understanding of love or pain. Make me feel the suffering. Give me poetry, pour out your soul. Give me you, not a part, but the whole. Don't pile up the images, word after word. Get me drunk, make my spirit stirred. Robert Frost said, there are three things a poem must reach: the eye, the ear, and what we may call the heart or the mind. It's most important of all to reach the heart of the reader. This is so true. If the poem doesn't speak to your heart, then it hasn't communicated anything to you at all. The best compliment I've received is from a friend who said, "Thank you for enriching my Facebook experience with your poetry." I was humbled and honored by his words, and it inspired me to keep believing in myself. Another of my friends wrote, "Thank you for rekindling and reigniting my love of poetry. I had lost it for a while. My mother loved poetry." You know, you've written something that spoke to someone, even if it was not to the whole world. You do not need the approval of the whole world. I wanted to say something about the motivation for my talk. Why did I choose this topic, authenticity and simplicity, in writing poetry? I have some very dear friends who love poetry. Most of them are not people with degrees in English literature or degrees in creative writing, but they love reading poetry. Their common complaint is that they don't understand a lot of what passes for poetry on social media platforms. They feel bad about not understanding it. And in some cases, they want to know whether they're dumb or stupid, which I'm sure they're not. According to me, a great deal of poetry is emerging from professors and students coming out of Masters of Fine Arts programs. These programs are mushrooming, especially in the West. The poetry that comes from these quarters can be pedantic and ostentatious. Seems like they end up only with the effect of bewildering the reader and turning him or her off completely. I've studied English, French, and American literature, and I love poetry, and I have a passion for it. But frankly, a lot of it goes over my head too. I don't think I'm unintelligent. I almost titled my talk, Poetry for the Common Man. I feel I am that common man that wants simplicity and authenticity to return to poetry. It's one of the reasons I love the American poet Edward Hirsch. I find him raw, vulnerable, and honest. He writes in a language I can relate to and understand. It touches my heart and identifies with my experiences, although he too was a professor. But he chose an authentic and simple idiom to convey his feelings and ideas. I feel my father's poetry is a lot like that too. He too was a professor and highly educated in literature. But when I read his poetry, there's nothing I have to struggle to figure out. It is simple yet profound. If I have to struggle, I give up. If I feel brain dead after reading the poem, I don't enjoy it. And poetry is meant to be enjoyed. I read a wonderful insight on the subject of poetry and simplicity in an article of the same name by Oriana Ivy, dated October 11th, 2012. She says, I think it's safe to say that the greatest poetry uses the simplest words, the simplest syntax, a childlike parallel construction, to be or not to be. And if not that, then can I make it more simple? It's one of the most important questions a poet needs to ask during revision. Paradoxically, depth resides in simplicity. So yes, please cross out most of those adjectives and adverbs and let the silence around the words speak for itself. I love that. Let the silence around the words speak for itself. Simplicity does not mean simplistic or unsophisticated. On the contrary, it means something that's easy to understand and clear. I'd like to end my talk with a poem by Mary Oliver, which ties in both the concepts of authenticity and simplicity. The poem is called Everything, and it was posted on a blog by a person. Everything by Mary Oliver. I want to make poems that say right out plainly what I mean, that don't go looking for the laces of elaboration, puffed sleeves. I want to keep close and use often words like heavy, heart, joy, soon, and to cherish the question mark and her bold sister, the dash. I want to write with quiet hands. I want to write while crossing the fields that are fresh with daisies and everlasting and the ordinary grass. I want to make poems while thinking of the bread of heaven and the cup of astonishment. Let them be songs in which nothing is neglected, not a hope, not a promise. I want to make poems that look into the earth and the heavens and see the unseeable. I want them to honor both the heart of faith and the light of the world, the gladness that says, without any words, everything. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you, and I wish you all the best in your literary endeavors.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was something very enlightening. And yes, as you said, that as two dolls cannot be equal, same, and same, the two poets and the poetries by the poets cannot be same. That's so true, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. We are having faculty members of different department, colleges, and universities here. If with your permission, we can take questions from them first, and then we will move towards students, ma'am.
Certainly, go ahead.
Yes. If any faculty member want to have the interaction or ask question, then you can please unmute yourselves. Yes, Naresh sir, you were speaking something. Sir, you're not audible.
Needs to unmute himself.
Okay, sir, I think you need to refresh your page. You are not audible. Even after unmuting, we are not able to hear you.
Yeah, can't hear.
Meanwhile, anyone else?
Anyone else maybe,
any professors can unmute and ask if they want to.
We have Shayantani Banerjee with us. She was reminding us that all of us almost have read the poem of Nissim Ezekiel's The Night of a Scorpion in our schools.
Yes.
And the imagery is so fresh still because
Yeah.
of its simplicity. So I request Anthony to unmute her mic and say something, or if there is some question.
Hello, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
When you were talking about simplicity, it just reminded me of the poem, The Scorpion, that we had all read in school. And such a simple thing. I mean, a scorpion coming in, biting that lady, and they were so frantic about what to do. People coming in, chanting prayers, putting paraffin on her leg, etc., etc. And through this simple thing, they try to show us that how there is so much of deep-rooted superstition in the society, and people still believe in such things. So there's
Right.
always this hidden meaning or hidden inner meaning behind such simple ideas and simple things. But ma'am, then there is another question. Since you said that it's so important to be simple, and simplicity is the basic thing through which we have authenticity. But we also find that when there are poets who are accepted in the international arena, they're generally using a lot of difficult words, idioms, phrases, etc. And probably they are known or understood to be very intelligent or probably very good poets and writers because they have used such phrases and idioms, and that beautification is what people think is required in poetry. So probably people are taking a foot back in terms of writing poetry because they think that until and unless we make it difficult or make it sound difficult, probably we won't be accepted by the people around. So, don't you
Absolutely
think
true.
that this idea of simplicity has evaded our minds? And we don't like writing poetry, or people have stopped writing poetry because it is something considered to be made difficult and only then accepted.
Absolutely true. This is a very, very good point you have raised, because that's what happens to me sometimes. Because, like I said, I write very simply. I write how I feel. I write exactly. That's why I said in that poem, give me, give me poetry that is, in those certain ways. And sometimes my husband, who is sitting right here beside me, hiding from the camera, and he said, he always tells me, he's my best critic. And he says, you write as you write. You write who you are. You write how you feel. And it is true that, it might not come across to certain audiences as very good poetry, but there are still other people who love it and who enjoy it. If I change myself and become like one of those, it's true, I may not get international fame or reputation or whatever it is, but if I believe that poetry should be simple and authentic, like you said, with Night of the Scorpion, it was a simple event. My dad's mother was bitten by a scorpion, and he described it simply, and everybody loves it and enjoys it. If you think about it, it's just about a scorpion biting his mother. But the imagery that's used is so simple. So you're right, there is a tension between what is accepted and people who, the more difficult you make it, and that's going to get you fame and reputation. It depends on the audience that you are writing for. That's why I said a lot of it comes out of, these people with big degrees, like creative writing degrees, etc. And some of the professors write like that too, and they make it very complex. And I start reading those kinds of poems. Within about 3 to 4 lines, I just give up. I say, I turn to my husband and say, am I unintelligent? Is there something wrong with me? And he says, absolutely not. I said, can you just look at this and tell me, like, what is it I can't figure out? And he said, I can't figure it out either. And he's well read, and he reads poetry and novels and everything. But my neighbor, who's 81 years old, she's French Canadian. She loves poetry. And she says, half of it I just can't understand. So I'm getting turned off. But she said, when I write, she enjoys it because it speaks to her. So keep doing the good work you're doing, and don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Today I want to write a psalm, not strict about the content or form. This is what Dr. Manoj Pathak sir is saying. If he can unmute himself.
Oh, that's from my
Good
Psalm
morning.
of Hope, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ma'am, Rabindranath Tagore, had the idea, and he
Yes.
often used to say that it's very hard to be simple. And I think is it not that a poet crosses through hard lanes to be simple and to show great philosophical in-depth ideas through their writings, and it certainly it helps the writing to be for long hours and days and years. So I think the poetry composed by the simple simple ideas, high ideas, high noted ideas with simple writing, simple
Yes.
language, remains
Yes.
for longer time.
Yes.
Do you think so? Even if it is not popular in short span of time, but it
Yeah.
remains for longer time.
Absolutely true. I think that there's a lot of tension between, in the minds of poets, between popularity and actually writing poetry in their own voice and poetry which is simple. So, as I said, when you write, each person has a certain kind of personality, and if you express simply what you believe in and what you write, it will stay longer in the reader's memory. And you put your statement very clearly and very coherently, because this is exactly what's happening today. I find a lot of poetry or poems that are written by people. I mean, there's so much coming out. I can't believe it. It's like a huge explosion. Everybody says I'm a poet. And like Bob Dylan, I quoted Bob Dylan said, if you say you're a poet, then you're not one. So people put on their profiles, I'm a poet, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, I'm a visual artist. When my father was writing, of course, you've got to remember that, as my husband was discussing with me, many people might have been writing poetry, but there were 3 or 4 that were very serious, and it was like almost their life's mission to write the poetry. So now I'm kind of like belonging to that generation. I'm trying to get used to the social media platforms. My children are better with that kind of thing, of course, young people, this generation. But the simpler we express, even if the thoughts are profound, but we express them simply and naturally, I think you're right, they will remain longer in the reader's mind. That's why you like Rabindranath Tagore, and you keep reading him over and over again, and you never stop reading him, because he has universal appeal for everybody. That's why he won the Nobel Prize too.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hope that answers the question.
Of course, ma'am. And I think we all should refrain from, using poetry as a platform of intellectuality. I mean, so-called intellectuality.
Yes.
Ma'am, I have 2 questions. One
Sure.
is a bit simple. When we refer to simplicity in poetry, and we read your poem or Ezekiel sir's poem like Miss Pushpa T.S. or the
Yes.
poet Lover and Birdwatcher, or a very English poem in a very English Indian language. So when we read these poems, and even you were also talking about Frost, and Frost is Frost because of his simplicity as well
Yes.
as the kind of meaning he generates in his poetry. So this is one aspect. On the other hand, we are also in love with Donne and, say, for example, T.S. Eliot. And certainly we love them also, we regard them also as great poets. So as a reader, as a simple reader, how we can make a balance between these 2 sides of poetry, I mean the one which is
He went off on it. I lost your last the part because I couldn't hear it. I lost the last part. Can't hear. I can't hear you.
I think there is some network issue.
Yeah, I just lost the last part of what he was saying. some technical issue, probably.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Yes, it's better.
I was saying, ma'am, on one hand, we talk about poetry and simple poetry like Ezekiel's
Yes.
Robert Frost. This is one aspect. And the next is that we are also in love with and we are also awestruck by poetry of T.S. Eliot and poetry of, for example, John Donne. So as
Yes.
a simple reader, I would like your guideline
Yeah.
regarding that how as a simple reader we can make a balance between these two. This is my first question.
Yeah. It's
And the
a, it's a.
other question,
Can I answer the first
yeah,
question?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sure, ma'am.
This is a very good question. My father was everywhere I read, and that he was influenced a lot by Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. And of course, I studied all of these when I was doing my bachelor's and my master's degree. But I have to confess that I don't understand them fully, and therefore I don't love them fully. And I think that it's really hard to strike a balance. I can understand the gist of what they're saying, and I love Robert Frost because the imagery is so, the language, the idiom is so simple and so direct. I think Eliot and Pound and people were very learned. They were steeped in certain kinds of intellectual, certain kinds of reading. And if we do that kind of reading, perhaps it'll make it easier for us to follow all of it. When we were in college and, university, of course, all the professors would explain it and they'd be raving about it and they would love it. But I went to college when I was very young. Actually, I went to college when I was 15 and 16. And
Oh, that's great.
by a very early age, I had finished my master's degree. So now when I reread those poems, with a little bit more maturity, I think I can get a better feel for it. But it's very hard to strike that balance. You're right. And those people have become very well-known, famous. They're icons of poetry. So John Donne, I better understand. He was a metaphysical 17th century poet. But that's now. That's not when I was in my 20s. Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay.
My next question is, since you were in the academics also,
Yes.
there are a lot of things happening in the recent years. I mean, in the 20th century, the death of the author, meaning is created, words are the tombstones of meaning, kind of things are coming continuously. So I'm asking this as with your point of view as a creative writer, that as a creative writer, when you are really creating your text, your poems, what do you think about these academic discourses like the death of the author or something related to meaning is created kind of thing?
This is a difficult, challenging question, actually. I think that when I'm writing, I'm really not conscious of everything that's happening academically and intellectually. There are influences on me, obviously, but when I started writing, and even now, after a bit of a pause because I was, raising 2 young children and working full time, it was pretty tough to do any significant writing. I think that I kind of had a goal in mind. I wanted to write all my lived experiences so that my children and my grandchildren would know my traditions, my culture, my experiences. So it's kind of, my poetry is a kind of a record of those things. I can't. Sometimes people give you a prompt and they say write. And I find it very difficult because if I haven't had that experience or seen that thing, I can't write about it. So things that are academic or intellectual, etc., are, I think they're reserved for somebody else. Maybe not me as a poet.
Yeah,
Is that kind of answering your question, sort of?
yeah, certainly, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, and thank you so much. I think you're the one designed that poster, or
Yes,
I,
ma'am.
yeah,
The poster was designed by Basudhara herself.
that was wonderful. My neighbor, who I mentioned, she was 81 years old and looking at the poster and sharing it with me. And she said, "Oh, this is so beautiful." So I said, I will remember to thank all of you because it's the first thing is the warmth of the invitation, and the second thing is the way that your college has presented the poster. It has really inspired me to prepare my talk thoughtfully, carefully, and really with my heart.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Now we are having too many questions in the chat box, as you can see.
Oh yeah, goodness, I didn't even look there. Yeah. That's true.
Yes, ma'am. So,
Can I have?
now we have Rajiv Dayal sir here with us. He's the head department of English and Cultural Studies, Kolhan University. So please, Rajiv Dayal sir.
A very good morning, or should I say good evening to ma'am there in Canada.
Good night.
And it's been a wonderful listening to you. And I would like to sort of try and understand what people have thought about and talked about our very loved poet, your father, Mr. Ezekiel. And the thing that I have in mind is what Jeev Patel, and the last two questions have been similar to what I have to ask, in the sense that the Jeev Patel remembers, there's this book that was published in 2008 about remembering Ezekiel, and in India. And Jeev Patel remembers your father, and he talks about there, he says that he was widely read in philosophy. And if I may read this word, he says, reading in philosophy and mystics was wide. So he was, and then he talks about a certain kind of a fear that was there in him about something. And then he went into reading, and he particularly mentions the Dhammapada and all that. So that he was simple, he was a great lyricist there, but there was something much more, much deeper in him, which was there. So we cannot say rule out complexity in whatever way, in philosophical form or whatever, and that can be presented in very simple verse. So that was his greatness. So I think it was much there. What do you have to say about his readings and his wider understanding of philosophy, especially Indian philosophy?
Very good. That's you have observed exactly. When I brought out my first book of poems, my father's comment was, you need to read more. Mm-hmm. And, when you are that young, we are very fond of reading when we are in school and college, but not exactly reading philosophy or, anything like that. And towards the end of his life, he mentioned that you should be reading Jewish mysticism. He became very interested in reading Jewish mysticism.
Yes.
And I really, and you're right that, he was so steeped in that. Like when he was in London, he used to buy, he didn't have much money at the time and would buy, secondhand books. He would wait for cheap tickets for the theater. He was completely immersed in the life of literature. And yet he was able to express his poems, his thoughts in language that you and I can understand. So I really think your observation is just spot on. It's perfect, because there is a lot of tension in people who are, very steeped in philosophy, etc. But they don't, when they write the poems, they confuse you, they bewilder you. You got to figure it out, and you've got to think about. There's one or two poems, when I read my father's poems, I kind of read them daily, and when I read them, there's one or two references I don't know about, because I haven't read that, or I haven't paid attention to that kind of art, because he was also an art critic, so he knew a lot about art. So he was that kind of man. He was an intellectual, a real intellectual, and I don't think I'm a true intellectual, as in the same way that he was. I've got no illusions about it. It's going to take me 2 lifetimes, and I only have 1 lifetime, so I don't think, so that's what he meant. You should read more on that. Read.
Yeah, that's been. But I was the other thing, just a little, not really a question, but something to understand about him was the Jewish aspect in him. As a Jew, how does it get into his poetry? In what ways? You talk about the Jewish mysticism that he got interested in. Earlier on in life, what was there in him that was Jewish about in his poetry?
Yeah, this is a question that's always asked. They ask it of him, they ask it of me. I think when you're born and in a certain culture, in a certain religion, like Judaism is a culture. And
Yes.
we were from a small community called the Ben Israelites. And
Yes.
I think that my grandparents were, they were pretty secular. They weren't Orthodox Jewish. And I think that influenced him a lot. And the same with my parents. And so we were very open to all kinds of influences. But I think the Kabbalah and the Jewish mysticism, he was reading later on in life. But it is it does shape your identity. You know, it does the way you are born and brought up in a certain family with the values and the traditions. We practiced all of the customs, but we were very well integrated into Indian society. So people would always ask us, "Are you Jewish Indian? Or are you Indian Jewish?"
Okay.
So this is very. So we are Jewish and we are Indians. Not one of them comes first. You know, it's like which one comes first? It's hard to say. So we are shaped by those things. But he read everything. He read the Quran. He read the Bible. He was very open, and as a result, I became very open and very tolerant. And he used to say that Jesus is a really good man. Muhammad is a good man. You have to take the best. And all religions lead to the truth, but the paths are different, the paths that we take. So I think that because he's Jewish, the Jewish people, of course, will take pride, and he's the Jewish poet, but he's also known as the poet of Bombay, the poet of India. So I think those two strands are very well reflected in his poetry. Yeah.
Just a permission, can we have some of your poems into our course, into our syllabus? Maybe we can, because we are going to revise things for our university.
Yes, so certainly. Which one do you want?
You have to suggest, okay, we'll talk about that, and we'll see.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, and I've got my favorites, and you might have some different ideas in mind, and we can certainly have dialogue about that. That's so thrilling, very exciting. Yes,
thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
And look at these questions, and it's like, I think my husband's taking down some notes. I hope these can stay. And somebody says, someone called Ekta Dogra says, how can they improve and come out of this bad habit? I think she said something before that. These are really good.
Just before that question, ma'am, can I read it out?
Yes, please go ahead.
Her query is, what if your style is not something that can be understood by the audience, even after breaking it down to the simplest one can? What if the way one thinks is simply like that, and they fail to steer it around in any other way? They write what they see and feel as naturally as they do, and write only the words, images they feel close to that at that moment. But somehow the imagery still comes out as a complex. This is what she was asking.
Yeah.
How they can improve and come out of this bad habit.
I think one of the things I would recommend, and I do that often, is to read the poems out loud to yourself. Read it out loud, and read it not once but many times. My father used to say that you had to revise a poem 8 times. Although he didn't actually do that with Night of the Scorpion, because that was one of the poems he was happy with. So he wrote one line, and then the next lines didn't come for a long time. There's a long story about that, which I have actually written. And then suddenly the rest of the poem came in a gush, and he was happy with it. So when you're reading out loud, you can hear imagery which is complex or simple. You can hear lines which you are not happy with. You can read your poems to someone. Luckily, I have my husband here who, poor guy, works 9 hours a day, and I still after that say, hey, you got to read this. Please read this. Please give me some feedback. I need it. And he said, do I have to? And I say, yeah, you have to. It might be 10, 11 at night, but please do read this and tell me. And then he says, if the poem is cluttered, or the poem is, not saying what it's supposed to say, if it's pretentious. So I like what Ekta is asking. It's very difficult, but when it comes out as complex, if you read it over and over, perhaps you are going to identify what's happening in that poem that you don't like yourself. If you don't like it yourself, someone else is not going to like it either. So yeah, it's a tough thing, very tough. And then there's Devashri asking questions here, and lots of people. How does poetry transform a society? He's asking. That's like poets have to give hope. They have to give hope. They are the providers of hope. And I think that because, at least for me, my poetry comes from the soul. And my dad would always talk about the soul. And every Sunday morning, I listen to a program called Super Soul Sunday, where Oprah Winfrey, she interviews different people who write about the soul. I think soul to soul, you can make a change, because it doesn't happen like someone explaining to you, this is how you do things. But by reading and looking into the minds of people, what are they thinking? How are they viewing the world? And how are they providing you hope? You can change society. That's a very good question.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering this question. We have Dr. Vipan Kumar, and he is asking,
Yes.
That how does poetry transform a society?
Yeah, and that's the one I was just explaining, just asking, telling you about. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's what I was explaining, is that when poetry influences your thinking, and in these days of the pandemic, there's so much poetry online. I've also read some of my poems online. I think it's for providing hope, for looking, it's kind of like a mirror of the soul. It like helps you to rethink maybe your values, your ideas, your positions that you have with regard to everything from politics to social things. So I think indirectly and sometimes directly, poets can transform society. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. We are towards the end of our session. Is there any other student who is interested in asking any question? We may take one or two questions only.
Sure.
Is there anyone else? Ma'am, we have one of our students. He is also writing poetry, Ayush Kumar. I'm inviting him. Ayush, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Where is Ayush?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Hello, very good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
And I hope you're having a lovely evening at your end.
Oh, lovely being with all of you. That's my lovely evening. You've made my evening.
It's been a pleasure, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is, how can a poet develop his or her own style? And I mean, should he actually create a style that is authentic and simplistic, or should they write what comes to them naturally, even if the result is a style that is quite unorthodox to common Joe or common folk? Question.
So your question is, how can they develop their own style, right? Again, like I said before, it's connected to authenticity. I believe you bring your whole personality to your writing. If you are a certain kind of person, like when we were young, we were in college and, we fell in love and that kind of thing. We all wrote lots of love poetry, right? But it was each person that was writing love poems, and I wasn't the only one. There were other people writing too. Everybody had their own way of writing it. Some of us put roses into our poems as a symbol. Some of us put the moon and the star. You know how love poetry is. But basically, if you're a certain kind of person, I think your poetry is a reflection of your personality. But then you're also reading so much poetry by other people, right? And you are influenced by their style. But if you imitate or copy their style, then you won't be you. You'll be someone else. And then you will have difficulty. Sometimes it happens to me too. I say, I sent a poem somewhere, it got rejected. And I say, oh, that's because the one that got accepted wrote in a certain way. Maybe I should try to write like that person. So I tried it and it was fake. It didn't work out. I went back to my style. So this is the tension that you will experience as you are writing poetry. I'm glad you're writing poetry because it's the best thing to do. Of course, that's according to me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, one last question. We have Dr. D. Prasad. He's asking something. So I request D. Prasad ji, please unmute your mic and ask the question yourself, please. D. Prasad, sir.
I think he can't hear you.
Oh, I think that he's unable to unmute his mic.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay.
Okay, so I think that nobody is left to ask any question.
That means maybe
we have one question. We are taking it as the last question for the session.
Okay, thank you.
Manu sir, if you can unmute the mic and ask the question on D. Prasad's behalf. The question is there, Manu sir.
Yeah, he has asked that how can we make interesting poetry in the situation of COVID-19?
Oh, I have to take a deep breath for that one. I think I have written some poems, and I think a lot of poets are writing poems, reading poems. Out of that, I think only one or two of mine are successful and have been published. But I think that it is coming more naturally to us because we are experiencing this world very differently than let's say before March, before the pandemic happened. So we should not try to write it, but if it comes to us, if there is some feeling about it, whether it's frustration or anger or boredom or depression, or because all of us are going through different emotions and every day is different, then we should write then we should write the poetry. My husband is giving me a tip over here. Yeah, but we should write the poetry that comes to us naturally about the way we respond to this virus. I sent a couple of poems out and maybe only 2 of them were published. And I thought, why is that? I wrote such good poems. What happened, you know? But art is very subjective. Not everybody likes everything you write. And they choose somebody else, not because your poem was not good, but because they chose the one that appealed to them. So we shouldn't take rejection badly. But during the pandemic, people are drawing, they are painting, they are writing, they're doing all kinds of very creative things. And that is an expression of the way they feel about what's going on. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that this is the right time. Anita ji, please आप अपना mic unmute करिए, video unmute करिए. Anita ji, please अपना mic unmute करिए.
Participants, please turn off your mics. Otherwise, you know, we will have to force you to leave the meeting. Please turn off your mics.
Anita ma'am, is there anything to ask?
No.
Kavita ji, we would like to have Alan sir in the frame, please.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Why should Alan sir be kept out of the frame? We would like to have him in the frame.
Oh, Alan, you want to see my husband, my beloved husband? Come along, Alan.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Wonderful.
How are you? Good evening, and good morning, both together.
This is next month we will be married 40 years.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And this is
Congratulations.
This man is so much like my daddy. It's not funny. Very much like my dad. So I don't know. They say that girls marry the men like their fathers, and I never believed it, but now I believe it after 40 years. Very much like my father in every way.
That is so nice of you, so sweet.
Yeah, it is true. It's very true. But anyway, it's been really lovely, just talking to all of you, and just your genuine. And I love when you guys speak Hindi. So next time I'm going to give the speech in Hindi.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Neha ma'am, we request you if you have anything to ask, please go ahead, and please extend the word of thanks also, Neha ma'am, please.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, Adi Prashad sir, please.
The question is, ma'am, how can we make interesting or poetry in the situation of COVID-19 for the students in online platform?
Your question has already been asked by Manoj Pathak sir, and ma'am has given the answer also.
Asked and answered.
So that time I'm not present, sir.
तो ये तो मतलब this is the fault of the network ना sir. कोई बात नहीं, no issues at all.
कोई बात नहीं,
Neha ma'am, please go ahead if you have any observation, any remark.